making that Assyrian ideology really manifest. I also had a few close-up shots. I just wanted to show you the kind of work that's being done on these objects. Just really fine technical mastery of jewelry making using techniques like cloisonné, engraving, filigree, granulation, tin soldering to get these tiny pieces to fit together. Even these very delicate grape clusters. This is actually from the previous slide. This crown has tiny glass grape clusters hanging from it that would have ringed the head of the individual who wore it. So just absolutely beautiful, beautiful objects coming from Nimrud. Also, we looked at this gold serving vessel last time, probably for serving wine. It's a strainer juglet. If you were to look down the front of it, as it were, you'd see a grill, right, that would strain out the dregs of wine. This is probably used for serving wine as opposed to beer. We've looked at beer and the way that it was consumed in previous classes. But you'll notice this vessel is a little odd. It's actually built so the handle is not, coming off of the back, but it's actually off of the side. And there's been a lot of talk as to why this is. And one of the theories is that this was a serving vessel that would be used by a servant who would stand next to the king. And instead of getting sort of in front of him, he'd be able to hold the vessel to the side and then pour sideways, refilling his cup over and over again. And certainly, Ashurnasirpal II, we know, was a wine drinker from his reliefs. We saw all those wine drinking scenes where he's holding a golden bowl with his bow at rest and sort of toasting Assyria triumphant. All right, so any questions about Ashurnasirpal II, about those reliefs, about Kalhu and the objects that are found there? Syrian expansion? No? Okay. What I thought we'd do is rewind a little bit. We've been talking about the collapse of the Late Bronze Age and Assyria's emergence in that power vacuum. We mentioned that Assyria draws on all of these previous traditions in its art, in its architecture, bringing them all together, whether it's craftsmen who are building the palaces and temples, or bringing all of the gardens together, bringing plants from the far periphery of the empire to Kalhu, to the center, where they grow better than anywhere else. We read those texts of Ashurnasirpal, right, that dictate that idea. So let's look at some of the origins for these Assyrian artistic conventions, specifically the carved orthostats that really define Kalhu. So we're going to rewind a little bit and take a look at what happened to the Hittite Empire during the collapse of the Late Bronze Age. Again, around 1200 or so, 1180, Hattusis ends up falling to what we believe is the onslaught of the Sea Peoples. Hattusis Ugarit also collapses. We know a combination of things led to this, not just these strange peoples from the sea, but also, famine and hardship that we see in the texts, in things like the prices of grain. The price of grain at Hattusis shoots up dramatically right before the collapse of the city. In fact, there's even talk that these cities destroyed internally, right? That the people that are living there themselves, no longer able to eat, get sick and tired of these great kings who are, supposed to be providing for them, and overthrow the city themselves. So probably a combination of factors that lead to this process of collapse. But again, as we've seen, shortly after this period of around 1200 to 1000, this dark age, we see the emergence again of isolated city-states. That process of regional collapse and then fragmentation and the emergence of new city-states. And that certainly is the case with the Hittite Empire. Around 1000 BC, we see the emergence of a group of city-states that are known as the Neo-Hittites. They're called the Neo-Hittites because in many ways they preserve the traditions and artistic conventions of the Hittite Empire. But there are some serious changes as well. Here's some of these Neo-Hittite sites. Major sites at Malatya, Carchemish, and Samal, which is ancient Zinjerli, as you can see here. It's also known in Hittite as Yaudi, and so that's why it's highlighted here. So we're going to look at these three cities right now. The Neo-Hittites actually pick up a new language along the way. Hittite appears to die out, and we see a language known as Luwian spoken. And Luwian is recorded in hieroglyphs. So this is actually a map not just of cities, but locations of Luwian hieroglyphs. So you can see them here, right? These small indentations. This is again from Rofe, so you can find this in your textbook. But hieroglyphic inscriptions on rocks, stones, and then portable objects. The distribution of this area. Again, this is not a centralized state. There is no, Neo-Hittite king per se. Again, we're going back to small kings in charge of individual city-states. But there are things that unify these sites, and again, they retain a lot of what we've seen earlier from the Hittite art and architecture. So for example, at the site of Malatya, again, 12th, 11th centuries, we see the use of carved stone orthostats that emerged at places like Hattusas, right? So this is, of course, the Lion Gate at Hattusas, that double lion gate leading into the city. We see inscriptions, right, of depictions of the king, of gods at the sanctuary just outside of Hattusas, Yazlakaya, we looked at. This is Tudhalias being embraced, right, by the storm god. And we compare that to, right, what takes place again just a few centuries later. The same use of stone orthostats, the same use of lions specifically to flank entrances and guard gateways, and also same depictions of kingship. If we compare, say, Tudhalias to this king from Malatya, you'll see he's depicted in a very similar way. He's got that distinctive curved rod of kingship, right, which we saw here with Tudhalias. Also, our gods have these very high, multi-horned headdresses. So a lot of parallels there. But now, right, instead of Hittite being written in cuneiform, we have Luwian written in Luwian hieroglyphs. You can actually, it's two different scripts. You can write Hittite in hieroglyphic script as well, but the language being used during this time is Luwian. The city of Zinjerli, moving along, is a heavily fortified site. These city-states, not being able to rely really on anybody but themselves, place a lot of emphasis and energy on fortifications. Malatya is a very well fortified city. Zinjerli as well, you can see it's surrounded by a massive circular wall, punctuated by 3 gates. And then the citadel that we've come to expect, right? The stronghold in case that city wall fails. You can hold out in a citadel containing a series of palaces and temples. And what we find at Zinjerli are a lot of the same motifs, the same use of large lions to flank the gates. Right, and this is, sort of our proto-Lamassu. The Assyrians will take this and, adopt it and modify it and turn it into those massive 5-legged Lamassu, those composite bull-winged, human-headed creatures that we looked at last time. What's more, these walls and the city gates were lined with orthostats. You can see them here. We'll look at a few more of them in a moment. But these actually are on display in Berlin. The site was excavated by the Germans, so that material was taken back and displayed in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. It's interesting, actually, the lions themselves, they were found all grouped together. It seems like they were ritually disposed of. 5 of them were found in a pit, but in their original context, they probably would have been on either side of the gateway, flanking and protecting the entrance, like we've come to expect. Let's see. Actually, I should mention too that Zingerle as a city, it's actually being excavated now. David Schlone at the Oriental Institute in Chicago has a dig there, and he's been able to find a tremendous amount out, not just by digging, but using really interesting methods. He uses electroresistivity, I can never say that word, which is a way of looking at soil density. So you just sort of walk over the site with these long electrical rods, and it records differences in the resistivity of the soil. So he was able to create an entire map of Zingerle. This is an earlier one that's sort of speculative, but David Schlone is doing some amazing work out there, and he always takes students. So it's another fieldwork opportunity if this kind of material interests you. And I know that actually there are students in their first year who are given a temple. So this is your temple to work on. So if you're interested in that, by all means, we can talk about it. Anyway, the sorts of the program of reliefs, again, we can see how this would later influence the Assyrian style with these progressions of reliefs in areas like these massive gates, decorative stone orthostats that would have protected the walls physically, but also, right, in their iconography, protected them symbolically. These gates are points of transition, weak points in walls, so you want to make sure that they're defended in every possible way. And you can see that the style, this North Syrian style, this sort of Neo-Hittite style, is very, very different than what we've seen before. It's gentler, it's rounder. It's quite different and quite unique compared to what we've seen before. This is a statue, an ancestor statue that also comes from the site of Zingerle, which is unique, but also, right, as you can see, draws on these motifs we've seen over and over again. There it is, right at the base, that master of the animals motif, and the flanking lions on each side. I should also say that these objects are all carved out of basalt, which is tremendously difficult to carve. It's a very, very hard stone, so that also probably accounts for some of the shapes that we see of objects like this ancestor statue, maybe adhering to the original shape of the stone itself. And again, here's another stone orthostat from Zingerle with the same sort of motifs that we've come to expect, right? Scenes of conquest in this case, of a chariot scene, and right, an unfortunate enemy being trampled by a horse. This is something, right, that looks like, it could be right out of the Assyrian reliefs that come about 100 to 200 years later. So another important Neo-Hittite site is the site of Carchemish. And Carchemish was important early on, actually. We have texts from Ebla, texts from Mari that discuss the importance of the site, as early as 1800 BCE. In fact, we know that the site was inhabited pretty much from the Chalcolithic on, so it was always inhabited. And the reason for that is that, as you can see, the city occupied